Okay, cool.
Okay. So, hey everybody, welcome. I'm so glad to bring a guest for a quick chat about California indigenous languages. So, I'd like to welcome Vincent McCarthy to the channel and give thank you for giving me the time. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mark. It's great to speak with you. Um, this has been a long time coming, and uh, glad to be able to talk with someone who has the same excitement for California native languages. So, for some background, I've been learning Kumeyaay on my own for about the past 5 years. Uh, I got interested in it just because growing up in San Diego, I heard about the Kumeyaay have uh, who are the original inhabitants of this land and who are still here. And I thought it would be so cool to speak the language that was originally spoken in this place. It's the one language that's native to where I live. So I started studying it seriously when I went to UC Davis, where I got a degree in linguistics and also minored in Native American studies. And a lot of my Native American studies classes focused on language. So that was a great combination of these two interests and gave me an excuse to study Kumeyaay on my own time.
Would you
And yes.
I'm sorry. Um during when you were living in San Diego or like going to school and stuff, did you hear about the Kumeyaay people? Because I feel like when I was growing up in Riverside County, I didn't hear anything about any indigenous groups from the area, but I think me and you have some common ground when it comes to wanting to learn the language of the area. So like in Riverside County, we have multiple. So I had, multiple like choices to learn. But did you hear about the Kumeyaay people in school?
Well, to be honest, I didn't hear much about them. There was just one assignment we had in fifth grade where we had to research uh, an Indian group near us, and that's where I first heard of the Kumeyaay. But I didn't even decide to study them at the time. Uh, I studied the Kauai, and basically the only thing I learned from that was that there used to be a Lake Kauai, which was this great source of food for them. So that's
Yeah.
all I took from it. But that sort of planted the seed of curiosity of, hey, I want to learn about these people in the future.
Yeah, I think I remember a little bit, but this thing I was in like fourth grade. They were doing like the mission projects. So
Hmm.
that's just as close to that history that we got. But I think my class didn't even do that project. But I remember seeing people, the shoe boxes or, their little projects and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't even realize about the native people until when I started to learn about the languages in like 2016. And then like when I started Serrano specifically in 2017,
Hmm.
really understanding that the people and where they, their beliefs and the language and stuff like that. So I'm sorry if you already said it, but you started to learn Kumeyaay seriously while in what year?
Yeah, it was probably my second year in college at Davis. Um, so I had already started with my linguistics major. Now, that wasn't my original major, but that's the one I ended up going with. And by the second year, I had heard of this class where you could pick a Native American language and just study it for that class and then do various projects related to it. So I just went for it, and that rekindled my interest in learning Kumeyaay, and that's where I really got started on learning substantial amounts of the language.
Okay. I mean, that's nice that you have that class. I mean, that I wouldn't know what language to choose, but so kind of referencing myself for a second, when I started to learn Serrano or Cahuilla or even like Luiseño, there's really no public material, right? There's no textbooks or you know, and if there are such a thing, they're pretty hard to come by. They're really kind of rare or out of print. So, were there any resources available to you, books, documents, or anything like that that helped you get started in Kumeyaay?
Yes, so in my class, there were some classmates who dealt with your situation where all they had were some, you know, grammars written by linguists, some various studies, maybe some recordings if they were lucky. And that was a large part of the class, was trying to learn how to decipher those things, which is pretty difficult for us, even for me, let alone someone without a linguistics background. But luckily with Kumeyaay, uh, there are a few resources, although they're fairly limited compared to the entire scope of what Kumeyaay is, which is a huge um, uh, dialect spectrum. But in the 60s and 70s, Margaret Langdon studied Kumeyaay, working most closely with Mesa Grande speakers. So specifically her two consultants were Ted Coro and Christina Hutchison, the authors of this dictionary. So she produced three things from those studies. There was a grammar, which is all full of linguistic jargon. And then there was this dictionary, came out in 1973. And then there was a teaching grammar or a textbook called Let's Talk Ipaya.
So for
So
those,
if you've been uh, studying Kumeyaay for a while, you'll become very familiar with these resources. So those gave me a huge head start, especially because the textbook, Let's Talk Ipaya, is geared towards a general audience. Someone, it can be your first foreign language and you can still get through it just fine. And I relied heavily on that book for the first several years of my learning. Up until recently, I still reference it. But then you can supplement with the dictionary and with the grammar, which covers some things that aren't in the textbook.
okay. So, when you got started, um, of course, like, well, I guess my another question should I ask is, have you studied another Native American language beforehand?
Mhm. Um, really, no, nothing substantial. While I was in Davis, I was part of a Nahuatl learning group for 1 quarter. I also took Quechua for 1 quarter
Hmm.
as a class, and that was pretty cool. Uh, but
Okay.
otherwise, no. But this first class I took, where we could pick our own language, that actually showed me a few interesting patterns that are common to a lot of North American languages. And it's pretty cool the kind of patterns that are shared across these languages that can be from totally different families, yet they have
Mhm.
some common characteristics.
Okay. Yeah, because like only like reason like I ask is like some um if you've never like studied Native American language and you're approaching one, just kind of like the two worlds of like English or any other like European like Spanish or Italian and then a Native American language where it's a totally different perspective, different of course like grammatical rules or even pronunciation, different consonants or structure
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So speaking of pronunciation and stuff like that, did you have or did you have access to recordings or anything like that before you started Kumeyaay or while you were learning Kumeyaay? or did you try to speak the language without really hearing a native speaker yet?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question because at first I had a really hard time accessing or finding any recordings. And when I did, uh, I had no idea what they were saying anyway, so it really didn't help me much. So at first, I just started by studying the descriptions of the sounds um, and the alphabet. So in the front part of this dictionary, as well as the textbook and almost any other resource you'll find that has Kumeyaay in it, it has a description of each of the letters and what they're supposed to sound like. And the rules can be pretty complicated. So it took a lot of trial and error. Um, I didn't learn them all at once. I sort of worked on it gradually and tried to take my best guess at what each word sounded like. But eventually, after some study, I reached a point where I could start picking out certain words in the recordings I was able to access, and that helped fine-tune my pronunciation. So I would say through reading alone, I was able to get in the ballpark of where words were supposed to sound like, but it was really important to then hear the words because there are a bunch of little details that will be different. And of course, uh, pronunciation can vary from word to word. Like the same letter won't always sound the same in every word, just because that's how writing is limited. It's never going to capture every little detail, or if it does, it's probably going to be so complicated that it'll be difficult to read or write. So you have to make a compromise, and that's what we do.
Yeah, I totally was in the same boat. So like for those that don't know, I was studying Lisenio and Korea before I got to Serrano, and when I had the books and dictionaries and stuff like that, but and you sit there trying to you read the pronunciation guide and stuff like that, and you might know how to like say each individual letter, but just like knowing just like the sounds like you were saying, it's not going to capture every little thing, the writing, because especially when you hear on tape or even in person, it's like it's a lot more to it, especially there's like little like details and stuff like that. So I would say, I would try my best to read and try my best, like, okay, I think this is what it might sound like. And then when I especially when I even got to Serrano too, and trying to learn how to read, um, I couldn't get all those details. And when I hear it on tape, it's like, you know, on paper it might sound like, read it might read like this, but when I hear the person say it, it's like it's a little bit more breathy, or it might be there might be a little hidden thing there, and it's, you know, you don't get that on paper. So I think we were on the same boat there. Um, because I try to learn through reading too, and it's nice to have those things, and we're grateful for the people that in the 70s or 60s that went out and recorded these people, these elders of the time, because we're reaping the benefits of their work now, so it's always nice to have that. So that's how you started, and so while you were deep in it, deep in the language, how did you have any like study regimens? Did you have any how do you approach learning the a language or even the language?
Well, I had a rather chaotic approach to Kumeyaay because I've had, you know, a series of phases in and out, in and out, in and out, the past 5 years, so it has not been consistent at all. I haven't followed the advice of all the great polyglots out there say you have to have a regimen and do this and this and this every day. It's more like, at one point I'd get inspired and I'd just be on it, like all day, every day. That's the only thing I wanted to do. And this thing became a hobby. And then at some points it became an obsession because I was so addicted. I'd stay up late at night doing stuff and I literally wouldn't want to go to sleep. And I'd stay up until like 3 a.m. until finally I just had to give up because I was so exhausted I couldn't go on. But I really didn't want to stop what I was doing. And then I'd reach a point where I just ran out of energy and thought, man, why am I doing this? I've no one to talk to. So I just stopped for months at a time. And I wouldn't even look at Kumeyaay. I wouldn't say a single word for like 6 months at a time until I'd fall back into it. So either way, I'm here now. I'm currently in the phase where I'm interested in doing this stuff, although I've had to balance it out with work and other things I have to do. But yeah, that's why I'm making this one big push right now to get involved with more people and make some progress in my learning and the work I'm doing with the language.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. At first it's a hobby, and then it becomes an obsession.
Mhm.
Like I had that same trajectory with, um, I mean, currently work with like the Serrano language, so like that's always kind of like on a daily basis at that they use it and stuff like that. But with other languages, it's just like every day I'm hitting the book, I'm listening to the recordings, I'm reading this and that, and getting all into it, and I'm trying to like speak with even with myself and stuff like that. I guess I was in the same boat too. I had nobody to talk to, so I would kind of rely on talking to myself, even if it's aloud. That might sound a little bizarre. And
Oh yeah.
Mr. Siva, even
No.
Mr. Siva says you sound like an old man when you say that, because he recalls an elder who was one of the last like Kauai speakers on the Morongo Reservation, and he would sit outside and talk to himself in Kauai, trying to remember in his own head. So like he would call me an old man, but I mean I took that as kind of a compliment, but but it's true. It's like when you have nobody to talk to and you have to keep it going, it's just even with yourself, it's just probably
Yeah,
one of the
but I think that's a normal technique for learning any language. You can benefit from talking to yourself out loud or in your head.
yeah, um it's just something that you have to do because you have to. I think maybe you can have your input on this, but of course the best way of learning a language is to speak it, right?
Well, the best way to learn to speak is to speak it. But
That's it.
now, if you want to learn the language, there are some things you have to do first, so you know what you're going to say.
True.
So I think the emphasis needs to be on input, what you take in.
That's a that's a good point. I didn't. If you want to speak a language, you have to speak it. That's a good point.